Calista Veir was the kind of woman who planned every detail of her life, right down to the color-coded calendars and spotless kitchen drawers, but nothing could have prepared her for Zevin Orric, a charming drifter with a golden smile and a bank account built on lies. By the time she discovered his web of deceit, she wasn't just betrayed, she was infected, hunted, and desperate enough to kill. Calista Rowan lived in the sleepy town of Fernlake, a place where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. From the outside, she was the perfect example of a responsible adult. At 38, she worked full-time as a nurse at the local clinic, volunteered on weekends, and had been married to Lennox Rowan for over a decade. Lennox, a quiet and dependable electrician, was known for his strong work ethic and gentle nature. Together, they appeared to be a stable, modest couple. They owned a small home on the edge of town, had no children, and rarely made waves in the community. Their life, though not glamorous, was comfortable. But behind Callista's carefully managed image was a woman whose heart had long grown restless. The spark in her marriage had disappeared years ago. What began as passionate young love had turned into a predictable routine of morning coffee, evening television, and occasional date nights that felt more like obligations than enjoyment. Lennox never strayed, never raised his voice, and never stopped loving her, but he had also stopped surprising her. The man who once wrote her poems and brought flowers to her job now spent most nights falling asleep on the recliner. Calista had once dreamed of travel, adventure, and a life that felt bigger than the borders of Fernlake. Now she found herself going through the motions, stuck between loyalty and longing. Everything changed during a summer community fundraiser held at the Fernlake Civic Center. Calista had signed up to organize medical supplies for a health awareness booth. That's where she met Zevin Creed, a man who immediately shattered the stillness of her world. He was in his mid-20s, tall with a chiseled jaw, sun-kissed skin, and an air of confidence that drew attention without effort. Zevin introduced himself as a freelance investor, visiting town to support a friend's small business. He had stories of luxury resorts, exotic travels, and high-risk deals that paid off in big ways. Calista was mesmerized. His charm felt electric. He spoke like someone who had seen the world and returned only to bring her along next time. Their conversations became more frequent. Zevin started showing up at places she frequented. The coffee shop near the clinic, the park where she walked after work, even the bookstore downtown. At first, she brushed it off as coincidence, but soon she realized he was intentionally inserting himself into her life. Rather than feel alarmed, she was flattered. No man had paid this kind of attention to her in years. She began dressing differently, wearing makeup more often, and checking her phone at odd hours. Her co-workers noticed her glow. Lennox remained oblivious, focused on a project upgrading old electrical grids for the town. He left early and returned late, giving Calista long windows of unaccounted time. It didn't take long before Zevin invited her out of town for a change of scenery. Calista hesitated, but gave in to the temptation. She lied to Lennox, saying she was attending a medical conference in another city. That weekend, Zevin took her to a luxury hotel, showered her with gifts, and made her feel alive again. It was the first time in years she felt wanted, seen, and excited about something. After that trip, the affair became regular. Whenever Lennox was busy, Calista escaped to be with Zevin. She stopped caring about her bank account balance. Zevin told her he had money tied up in investments and just needed short-term help to fund some deals. Blinded by infatuation, she offered to help. In secret, she opened a new bank account and started funneling money into it for Zevin. She convinced herself it was temporary. She believed him when he said he'd pay it back. With every dollar she gave him, she thought she was investing in a future, one where she'd finally break free from the monotony of her life and run away with the man who made her feel alive again. But Calista didn't know she was stepping into a trap, carefully set by a man who saw her as nothing more than a paycheck with emotions. The double life she was living had just begun, and it would only spiral deeper into darkness. Zevin Creed played his role with the precision of a seasoned manipulator, Calista never realized just how calculated his every move had been. From the moment he met her at the community fundraiser, he had already profiled her, an older woman, successful, emotionally starved, and married to a man who was more predictable than passionate. She was perfect for his scheme. Zevin had pulled the same trick before in different towns, under different names. His real identity was buried beneath layers of false addresses, expired IDs, and disposable phones. He was a ghost with charm, and Calista was simply his latest mark. As the months went by, Zevin's influence over Calista deepened. He convinced her to believe in a shared dream, something thrilling and new, leaving behind the dull routines of Fernlake and starting fresh somewhere else. He described a future where they would live in a seaside condo, invest in property, and travel the world together. Calista, drawn to the fantasy and desperate for more, agreed to help finance the dream. Zevin told her he had investment deals in progress that required liquidity. He promised massive returns and asked her to trust him. She transferred her savings bit by bit, slowly depleting the emergency fund she'd built with Lennox over the years. But it didn't stop there. Zevin insisted it would be easier if everything went through an account under his name, to avoid tax flags, he claimed. Calista, blinded by infatuation, opened a new bank account under a fake business name and gave Zevin full access. The transfers became more frequent and bolder. Her monthly withdrawals doubled, then tripled. Whenever she hesitated, Zevin guilted her with emotional manipulation, reminding her of how unhappy she'd been before him. He told her they were building something real, and that she was the only person he trusted. The lies worked every time. Behind Callista's back, Zevin was entertaining multiple women in nearby cities. He kept separate phones for each one, using different names and fabricated backstories. With another woman named Tarsia from Meadow Ridge, he played the role of an aspiring film director. With Jolena from Clarksdale, he pretended to be a luxury car dealer. Each woman believed she was in an exclusive relationship with him. Each one gave him money. Calista, however, was the biggest contributor, by far. Back in Fernlake, Callista's best friend, Serafina Veir, began to notice troubling signs. Calista had always been calm and careful, but now she seemed jittery, distracted, and evasive. She cancelled lunch plans last minute, missed work for vague reasons, and once showed up to a volunteer event looking disoriented and pale. Serafina knew something was wrong, but didn't have the full picture. That changed one Friday evening when she spotted Callista's car parked outside a luxury hotel 2 cities away. Serafina had travelled for a family visit and wasn't expecting to see anyone she knew. But there was Calista, walking into the lobby with a man who looked nothing like Lennox. Serafina quietly followed and snapped a few photos on her phone. She didn't confront her that night. Instead, she waited, heart pounding, wondering what her friend had gotten herself into. Meanwhile, Callista's guilt began to surface, but it was tangled with fear. She couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if Lennox ever found out. Their joint accounts were still intact, but she had created enough distance to keep him unaware, for now. She kept inventing reasons to avoid intimacy with him, claiming she was tired from work or experiencing stress-related issues. Lennox, ever patient, accepted it without protest. He had no idea his wife was funding another man's lifestyle behind his back. By the 6th month, Calista noticed subtle changes in Zevin's tone. He was no longer as affectionate. His calls grew shorter. His visits became infrequent. He began missing their weekend getaways. When she asked questions, he brushed her off or claimed he was under pressure from business meetings. Her texts started going unanswered. The fantasy she had believed in began to fray at the edges. Then came the first real threat. After she asked for some of the money back, Zevin coldly warned her not to push. He told her he had pictures, videos, even bank records that could ruin her marriage and career. For the first time, Calista saw a flicker of the man behind the mask. The charm vanished. What remained was a predator who had gotten what he wanted and was now holding her hostage with her own secrets. Calista began to unravel. She had betrayed her husband, drained her savings, and become trapped in a dangerous game with a man who was never who he claimed to be. She had no way out, and no one to blame but herself. Callista's world started collapsing from the inside out. The weight of her lies, her shrinking bank account, and Zevin's threatening shift in demeanor slowly tore at her mind. She couldn't sleep. Her appetite vanished. Every time Lennox walked through the door, she flinched, half expecting him to throw accusations or wave evidence of her betrayal. But he remained the same, calm, quiet, unaware. It made her spiral deeper. The more he loved her without question, the more her guilt festered. At work, Callista's performance faltered. Her colleagues whispered about her forgetfulness and her sudden bursts of emotion. One afternoon, she broke down in the storage room and cried into a box of surgical gloves. Serafina, sensing the silent crisis, cornered her in the parking lot. She didn't mention the photos, but pleaded with her to talk. Calista brushed her off with a weak smile and a tired excuse. She couldn't risk opening up. Zevin's threats played on repeat in her mind. She knew Serafina meant well. But if word got out, if Lennox or her employer found out, her life would be over. The shame was unbearable. Desperate to make things right, Calista confronted Zevin at the apartment he occasionally stayed in when he passed through Fern Lake. She caught him off guard, and for the first time, he dropped the act completely. He didn't flatter her, didn't reassure her. He laughed, cold, dismissive, and mean. He told her she was just another lonely woman who paid for attention. Then, he warned her again. If she didn't stay quiet and cooperative, he would destroy her. He claimed to have screenshots of their messages, footage of them in hotels, and full records of her bank transfers. He'd ruin her marriage, her career, and her reputation. No one would believe she was a victim. He'd make her look like a manipulative adulterer, not a woman seduced and drained. She left in a haze of humiliation and panic. Her hands shook as she drove home. That night, she vomited in the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. She no longer recognized the woman looking back. In a moment of weakness and confusion, she went to a nearby clinic to get tested for sexually transmitted infections. It was a routine check, something she thought might bring peace of mind. But a week later, the results came in, positive for HIV. Calista nearly passed out in the parking lot after reading the report. Her chest tightened. Her breath came in sharp gasps. The room spun. Her affair had not only cost her financially and emotionally, it had now damaged her health permanently. She was crushed under the silence of it all. She told no one, not Serafina, not Lennox, not even Zevin. She researched obsessively, reading every article she could find on treatment, exposure and transmission. It all pointed to one truth. She'd contracted it from Zevin. She thought about confronting him again, but knew it would only make things worse. He would deny it. He might even turn violent. She began taking medication in secret, hiding the bottles deep in her closet behind an old purse she never used. The psychological toll was unbearable. She contemplated suicide more than once. She walked along the lake, staring into the water, imagining how quickly the cold would end everything. But something always pulled her back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the fragile hope that one day the truth could be controlled and the damage repaired. Still, she was running out of time, and Zevin wasn't done with her. 3 weeks after her diagnosis, Zevin called with a new demand. He claimed someone was trying to trace his finances and accused her of leaking information. She denied it, but he didn't believe her. He told her she owed him for breaking his trust and that she needed to give him more money to keep him safe. When she refused, he reminded her of what he had: photos, videos, bank records. Then he made a final threat. If she didn't comply, he'd ruin not only her but Lennox too. That night, Calista sat in the dark living room, watching her husband sleep in his recliner. Her heart pounded with terror. She had brought a virus into their home, betrayed his love, and now his life was in danger too. Not just from disease, but from a man who had no conscience, no remorse, and nothing left to lose. Something inside her shifted. This couldn't go on forever. One of them had to disappear, and Calista wasn't ready to die. Calista's thoughts turned darker by the day. The version of herself she once knew, honest, meticulous, loyal, was gone, replaced by a woman consumed by secrets and cornered by fear. Zevin's threats hung over her like a storm cloud, and the HIV diagnosis only made her feel more trapped. She kept playing out every possible outcome in her head, but no matter the path she imagined, it always ended in ruin. For the first time in her life, she truly understood desperation. One morning, after taking her medication in the privacy of her locked bathroom, she opened her email to find a message from an anonymous account. There was no greeting, no context, just a zip folder with the name Insurance. Against her better judgment, she downloaded it. What she found inside shattered her already fragile resolve. Dozens of pictures, some of her taken without her knowledge, and others of Zevin with different women, some intimate, some clearly transactional. There were copies of forged identification documents with different names and birth dates, screenshots of conversations between Zevin and other victims, and even a spreadsheet listing women's names alongside dollar amounts. At the bottom, her name, Calista Veir, $122,500, active. She sat in silence for nearly an hour, rereading the files. She had not been his only target. She had been part of a system, a well-rehearsed scam designed to drain lonely, vulnerable women of their money, pride, and sanity. The anonymous sender had exposed everything. But why? And why now? Calista didn't have time to dwell on the questions. A day later, Zevin showed up unannounced at her office parking lot, his face twisted in quiet fury. He didn't accuse her, outright, but his body language told her he knew she had something. She backed away slowly, feigning confusion, then hurried inside, locking the door behind her. She didn't report him. She couldn't. He still had power over her, and she feared he might make good on his promise to destroy her if she tried to expose him. But that night, something changed. As she sat staring at the spreadsheet, her eyes fell upon one of the names she recognized, Tasia Laurent, a woman from Meadow Ridge. She recalled a brief mention of her on Zevin's phone once, a contact he claimed was just an old friend. The thought that another woman had suffered like she had made her chest tighten. She opened a burner email account and messaged Tasia using only the documents as proof. The response came the next day. Tasia had received the same insurance folder, and she too was infected with HIV. Calista cried, reading her words. The pain was familiar. The shame mirrored her own. They weren't alone anymore. From there, everything escalated. The two women connected the dots and discovered Yelena, another name on the list, was found dead the year before in what was ruled a suicide. But now, in light of what they knew, that ruling felt suspicious. Yelena had reportedly overdosed in her apartment, leaving behind vague notes about a man who took everything. Calista and Tasia knew it had to be Zevin, and if he had driven one woman to suicide, he might do it again, or worse. Driven by the urge to protect not only herself, but any other future victims, Calista began documenting everything. She printed copies of the emails, the photos, the bank records, and the clinics. Test results. She stored them in a locked box at Serafina's house without explanation. Serafina was confused, but trusted her enough to keep it safe. It was her safety net, her only backup in case something happened to her. But Zevin was growing suspicious. He started sending cryptic messages, short phrases like "I see you" or "Don't test me." Then, one evening, Calista returned home to find her bedroom drawers rummaged through and her closet door left ajar. Nothing was missing, but something was off. Lennox didn't notice anything unusual, but Calista was certain Zevin had been inside. It was a warning. She was being watched. That same night, Tasia sent her a message that chilled her to the bone. He came to my apartment, didn't say a word, just stared through the peephole. I'm leaving town. You should too. Calista knew she had crossed a line Zevin wasn't willing to forgive. She also knew that running wouldn't solve anything. He would find her. He always did, unless someone stopped him first. And at that moment, Calista realized something even more frightening than his threats. She was ready to do whatever it took to end this, even if it meant blood. The air in Fern Lake felt heavier the night Calista decided to take matters into her own hands. There was no dramatic epiphany, no whispered goodbyes, just a quiet resolve that filled her chest like cold smoke. She had exhausted every option, trusted the wrong people, and gambled her life for a man who had used her like currency. Now, the woman she had once been no longer existed. In her place stood someone new, someone sharpened by betrayal, sickness, and fear. Zevin had taken everything from her, but he wasn't going to take her life. She followed him for 3 nights. Zevin had returned to town with little warning and checked into a rundown motel on the edge of the industrial district. He moved with the same cocky indifference, talking to women outside gas stations, flashing his smile like a weapon. Calista observed him from her car, parked far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to learn his patterns. He always left around 11 p.m. and returned by 2 in the morning. He never locked his motel room door fully, as if convinced no one dared touch him. On the 4th night, Calista prepared a small bag. Inside, she packed rubber gloves, bleach wipes, and a burner phone. She wore an oversized hoodie and dark jeans, her hair pulled back tight. She didn't look like herself. That was the point. At 1:40 a.m., with trembling hands and a silent scream inside her head, she stepped out of her car and walked to room 9. The hallway was empty. The overhead light buzzed softly. She knocked once. Nothing. She turned the handle. It opened without resistance. Zevin was passed out on the bed, shirtless, one hand draped over his stomach, the glow of his phone still pulsing on the nightstand. He didn't stir. Calista stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Her heart thundered so loud it rang in her ears. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a syringe. It wasn't lethal, at least not in a traditional sense. It was filled with her own blood, untreated, carefully drawn over days. She had considered every possible moral boundary, every consequence, but her thoughts always circled back to the truth. Zevin had already infected her, and likely others, with no remorse. If he wanted to play God, she'd show him what judgment felt like. She approached the bed, her body barely holding together under the weight of what she was doing. She pressed the syringe into the meat of his arm and pushed the plunger. Zevin groaned slightly, but didn't wake. When it was done, she wiped the surface with bleach, tucked the needle into a sealed pouch, and slipped out the way she came. No alarms, no screams, just silence. Back home, she waited. Hours passed. Dawn broke. Then a day. Then 2. No news, no retaliation, nothing. On the 3rd morning, Calista received a text from the burner phone she'd used to contact Tasia. He's gone. She didn't know what gone meant at first. Dead? Missing? Arrested? She didn't reply. She watched the news obsessively, scanning for a name, a face, anything. On the 5th day, a story broke. Zevin Orric was found stabbed to death in an alley behind a pawn shop in a neighboring town. The police called it a robbery. No suspects, no witnesses, no evidence. The report said his belongings had been taken, but strangely, his phone and wallet were still on him. It didn't make sense, but to Calista, it didn't have to. He was gone. The aftermath didn't offer relief. Instead, it left an empty space where fear used to live. Lennox remained unaware of everything. Serafina eventually confronted her, sensing something had snapped, but Calista gave nothing away. She kept her routine, took her meds, buried the secrets. Months passed. Tasia never resurfaced. The documents in Serafina's closet stayed locked and untouched. Calista lived in a strange limbo, free but not forgiven. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the ghost of a woman she used to be. The affair, the lies, the virus, the death, it had all taken its toll. But she survived. What haunted her most wasn't the act itself, or even the body she left in that alley. It was the simple, chilling realization that somewhere in that process, between pain and vengeance, she had stopped being a victim and started becoming something else.